Welcome back, everyone. This is Craig Rosenberg, the Funnelholic. I'll let Matt and Brent laugh about that later. That's my blogger handle, and I am a student of sales and marketing, which means I like to write about it, I like to read about it, and I especially like to have conversations like the one we're about to have so I can learn more about it. As everyone knows now, that I'm in working with Lattice Engines here to really study what it takes to be a modern sales leader today and what the best practices are, what folks are seeing. And I have some of the top thought leaders in the space coming on and talking about particular topics. When you're talking about modern sales and modern sales leadership today, you can't avoid not talking about the challenger sales model. And so it's with great pleasure to me, at least, and eventually to you guys as you see this, that we were able to get Matt Dixon and Brent Adamson to come on and talk about the challenger sales model and what that means to the modern sales leader. So today's this is going to be a great session. If I was just telling Matt and Brent how I it's like there's this growth chart of mentions on the challenger sales model. It's like now if I'm around a sales leader, I'm going to hear about it. And I was just telling these guys that now marketing folks are starting to talk about it because conceptually, well, actually, there's tactics that they recommend for sales folks that are just perfect fits for the marketing folks. So this is just a great topic, and I'm very excited to talk about it. So before I go, so I don't mess everything up, I'd love for you guys to introduce yourselves. So Matt, why don't you go first, and then Brent, if you could follow with a minute or two about yourselves.
Sure. Thanks, Craig. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate. It's a great project, and we're thrilled to be here. Everyone, my name is Matt Dixon, co-author of The Challenger Sale, along with my colleague Brent Adamson, who video-wise, I don't know if he's sitting to my right or my left, but one or the other. But I serve as executive director here at CEB, which was formerly the Corporate Executive Board, which is a global business research and advisory company based in Washington, D.C. I run the sales practice here, where Brent and I work together. And in the sales practice in CB, we serve about 700 B2B sales leaders and their teams, providing them with data and insights around how to get after pressing problems, the ones that vex B2B sales leaders year over year. And we present that content out to our global membership. So I've been at our company for about 14 years now, and the Challenger Sale was one of our most recent kind of public pieces of research, but we've been in this business for a very long time.
Brent?
Great, thanks, Matt. Hi, Craig, and thanks for the opportunity. Again, my name is Brent Adamson. I am a managing director here in the sales and marketing practice at CEB, and specifically I sit on what we call our executive advisory team, which largely means I spend a lot of time in planes. I fly around the world taking the products that Matt's team produces in the research side and building stories around them and conveying them back to companies and helping them think in a very practical way how to apply those lessons in their companies. And the one thing I'd say, just to kind of add on to Matt's point, and then we can dig in, is that what really excites us about all the work that we do here at CEB is that it's all data-driven, it's all research-driven. So people ask us, are you a consulting company? What are you? What we really are more than anything else is a research organization. We go out and we study the world of sales and marketing, particularly B2B sales and marketing, which is at least where Matt and I sit, in as much depth as we possibly can with as much qualitative and quantitative research. And then what we could do is we could take all that research and just give it to the world and say, here's a bunch of research. What we found in the past is if you present the world with a bunch of research, no one will listen to you. So what you got to do is you got to build a story around that research. You got to build a story that's compelling and interesting and captures that research in a way that will drive people to action, very much like the way we've got to sell effectively. You got to, whatever you're selling, you got to capture that in the story too. And so that's where the Challenger Sale really came from. It came from a whole lot of research, a massive amount of data-driven research around which we built what turned out to be a pretty compelling story. So happy to talk about it.
Terrific. All right. Well, I spent a lot of time trying to find a way that I could look really smart in asking you this question, and I just couldn't get around it. And we have to, I mean, it's the core of why we're here, which is, what is the challenger sales model? And so I wrote all these different ways to ask it, and I guess the best way is to just say, what is the challenger sales model? I'll throw that to you guys and let you guys run.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sure, I'll take a crack at that, and then Brent, feel free to jump in. So at the highest level, the challenger sales model is a selling approach that's about leading with insight. And what we mean by that is it's about coming to the customer's office, showing up to the customer conversation with new ideas, usually ideas the customer hasn't thought about before, that reframe the way the customer thinks about managing their own business. So new ideas for making money, for saving money, for avoiding risk, engaging employees, grabbing market share, whatever the objective is. but again, in a sort of a provocative way, in a way that reshapes the way the customer had previously thought they were to get after these objectives. And we distinguish that from other selling approaches that we've seen kind of come and go in the past. Of course, product selling, which is about effectively showing up and throwing up, pardon the expression, but leading with the features and benefits of a product. In solution selling, which we would characterize as a selling approach primarily driven by leading with questions. So what are the business objectives that you, Mr. and Ms. Customer, are trying to get after? And let me see if there's a way that I can attach our company, our solutions value proposition to those business objectives.
Brent, and just kind of as a bit of background, Craig, and some of your listeners will know this, some won't, but as I mentioned before, it's about everything we do is data-driven, and so this story is no different. So where the challenger model really comes from is not sort of observations of the world per se, or in our 30 years of selling what we've seen win is, but rather we've studied the world with a huge amount of data. So in this case, we've now gathered data on over 20,000 sales professionals, B2B sales professionals all over the world across every major geography, go-to-market model, industries, so no matter what you sell, where you sell, how you sell it, direct, field, phone, indirect, you name it. But in what we did is we tested those sales reps across a wide range of attributes, skills, behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, trying to understand what truly sets the very best sales reps apart from everyone else. Now, what's interesting is you got 55 attributes roughly, and you've got 20,000 sales reps. It gives you this huge database. So the first thing we tell people about that database is, whatever you do, don't print it. But the second thing we tell you is that what's interesting is that you got to make some sense out of it. So you step back and you look at this database, and what we did is we tried to, in our effort to make some sense out of it, we ran what's called a factor analysis on that data. And all a factor analysis does is it takes a large amount of data and it boils it down to the smallest number of categories, where everything in that category moves together in a statistically significant way. And all that means is a fancy way of saying, what's interesting is when you look at the data, you can derive from the data. It's not assertion, it's just an observation of what actually happens in the data. You find that virtually every sales professional has this tendency to fall into one of 5 distinct profiles that we found in the research. And we're by no means saying that these profiles are mutually exclusive, because they're not. I mean, reality is always more complex and messy than data is. And in fact, what you find when you look at the data is that virtually every sales rep has at least a baseline level of performance across all of the attributes, which could have allowed us to simply say, be good at everything. But that's not very helpful to anybody, right? But what you find nonetheless is that almost every single sales rep has this really interesting tendency to gravitate very dramatically to a very specific subset of those attributes in defining sort of their primary posture when facing off with a customer. And there's sort of 5 different ways that gravitational pull can happen. Sort of, it's kind of like going to college, right? We all take the core curriculum and then we major in something. Sort of like there's 5 majors of sales professionals. There's a hard worker, always willing to go the extra mile, doesn't give up easily. They do more calls an hour, more visits per week. They're always looking for feedback. There's the challenger, the sort of the debater on the team. They've got this deep knowledge of the customer's business, but they use it to challenge their customer's thinking. The relationship builder, very much focused on building personal, professional relationships, advocates across the customer organization. Their posture largely is, whatever you need, customer, I am here for you. You say the word, I will get it done. Right. The lone wolf, the prima donna of your sales force, always follows their own instincts instead of the rules. They drive you nuts because you never know where they are and never know what they're doing. And you'd fire them if you could, but you can't because they're crushing their number. And then the problem solver, as we say in the book, the reactive problem solver, very detail-oriented, very focused on sort of post-sales implementation, making sure that all those promises that were made as part of the sale get kept once the sale is done. So the first thing that blew us away in all this research is the fact that there are these 5 profiles, and they've remained consistent, dramatically so, statistically speaking, across all the data. And also when you go out and you compare it to the real world, you find that most of us will find ourselves in one of those 5 profiles more than the other 4. But the thing that truly blew us away is when you take those 5 profiles, you compare them to performance, and that's where really the story comes from, right? Because what you find is, as many of your listeners will know, is that by far and away, the challenger rep is more likely to be a star performer, to outperform their colleagues than any of the other 4. The rep that's more likely than any of the other 4 to meet or exceed goal on a consistent basis year over year to drive growth for their company. And then, so that's the one sort of kicker of this lesson. The flip side is equally interesting, is the profile least likely to be a star performer, which turns out to be the relationship builder, which is a really interesting thing in itself, which we can talk about if you like. But at its core, that is the challenger story. The fact that you find these reps called challengers who are so much more likely to be star performers than anyone else, particularly relative to the strategy most of us have been pursuing for years, which is building better relationships through familiarity, through needs, through the meeting of our customers' needs. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. And so it's a very different model going forward versus sort of meeting customers' needs versus challenging their needs.
Is this a, and it might be both, but uh, is this something that a sales leader can change in his, is this trained? Is this hired? You know, so you take on the challenger model and you say, so a sales leader embraces it, says, you know what, I love it, but now what? Like, is this about hiring people who are challengers, or is this a mentality change across the organization? How do you get to where where you guys recommend?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's probably the question I would say, but I don't know if you agree that we get asked probably more than any other is this nature nurture? How do I execute this? How do I make this happen? Can this even happen given where we are right now, given the makeup of our sales force and in the way we engage the customer? And what we say is we know a few things. One, across all of the salespeople in our database, as Brent said, every one of them, to a degree, has a trace element of at least the challenger gene. And so we try to focus our research not on things that are nature, but rather things that are nurture. So things that can be taught, things that can be coached to, skills that can be cultivated and developed with practice and coaching and the right kind of training. We know this as well through experience. So a few years after we did the Challenger research, we launched our Sales Effectiveness Solutions group, which does Challenger training. And so they've been out there for the past couple of years now with companies rolling out the Challenger model, and their own experience in the field would suggest that companies, when committed to it, again, with the right training, with the right coaching, and yes, to your point, with adaptation to their current hiring approach and what they're looking for from external job candidates, with these moves, you can move the needle and you can move the dial, and you're not going to flip-flop the sales organization where you've got 80% relationship builders right now, and now all of a sudden a year later you have 80% challengers, but you do see a secular movement in terms of the proficiency and challenger skills amongst your salespeople that can be tied cleanly to improved sales results. Now, one of the really important things, though, I think to point out is that, and we go to great lengths to talk about this in the book, and I think it was one of the sort of early misconceptions around Challenger is that Challenger is actually just a sales rep story. It's about a story of a different set of skills required in this new selling environment, the new select four set of skills that the best salespeople possess, and that is certainly true. But the other half of the story is a marketing story. It's actually the story of messaging. It's a story about the customer conversation. And one of the things that Brent and I go to great lengths to tell people when we talk to them about Challenger is it's an organizational transformation. It's not merely a flavor of the week training exercise. The training and the coaching are different in a Challenger world where you're trying to change tacit skills, getting people comfortable with tension, pushing the customer outside their comfort zone. But it's a mistake to actually go out and tell your salespeople to go forth and teach the customer new things, deliver insight, make them smarter, go challenge people, because what you get back in return can be quite scary. You get sales reps who teach customers to value many different things, and it pulls your organization in many different directions. You get salespeople to go out and teach customers about things you can't actually help them with, and then thereby teach them into the arms of your willing and grateful competitors. Or maybe they teach them about problems that nobody can solve, and by definition then give them something that will keep them up at night, perhaps unwittingly. But the key here is for the organization to figure out what is it that makes us unique? What are the things that make us distinct in the market? And we always tell people this. It's probably not because you're innovative. It's not because you're customer-centric. It's not because you're employee-centric. It's not because you're entrepreneurial or green or any number of business platitudes. It is the thing that really defines and answers the question, why should your customers buy from you instead of from the competition? What's the thing your competition can't touch with a barge pole? Once you define that, how do you create a conversation that leads to those things? By leading with insight that's about the customer's world, that reframes the way they think about managing their business, that leads them to value the things that make you really unique. The job of getting all that right is not the job of the salesperson typically. It's the job of marketing in most organizations and really of leadership to figure out what are those teachable messages, what are those stories, how do we package them, align them to customer segments, et cetera, and then teach our salespeople to deliver them. So if you're only focused on this from a skills perspective, you're really only kind of scratching half the itch or getting half of the solution out there.
Have we seen, like, the thing when I read your stuff that's really interesting to me is you say there's 5 types of sales reps, and so um, and I know you kind of just answered it, but I just wanted to. So I get the researcher, or not the researcher. I mean the relationship builder. do I just avoid the relationship builder, or do I try to? Am I always going to have relationship builders in my organization?
Well, there's a couple ways to think about that, Craig. So let me back up and take a running start at that question with a little bit of your previous question, which is, can challengers, are they born or can they be made? It's funny because as I mentioned, I spend a lot of my time traveling around the world presenting this research and other research to companies, and I've presented this to tens of thousands of sales reps, and in particular when you present it to sales reps, the quota carrying the front line of your sales force, the thing that we have to be really careful to do or to say is something we mean quite literally, and really it's really important to us to sort of iterate this or reiterate this, which is, as interesting as the profiles are, and they really are interesting, and they're really practical in terms of sort of managing your sales force, at the end of the day, despite the name of the book and everything else, the story isn't about the profiles. It's not really about the profiles at all. What the story is truly about is the behaviors that make up the profile. It's not the question. So in other words, we can't stand, nor could any other leader stand in front of their sales force and say, be a challenger, go get them, right? It's like, because the sales force is going to look and say, what do you want me to actually do? I mean, they might agree with you, say, I'm going to go be a challenger. But what does it mean? What do I do? What are the behaviors? And so the question that really is more interesting is not so much who is a challenger, but rather what do challengers do? Because if we can, and we have, so once you sort of locate or identify those behaviors that truly make someone a challenger and make them unique, then the question is, for all of us, how can the rest of us begin to adopt some of those same behaviors in our own sales approach, irrespective of whatever profile we might have thought ourselves to be in? And at that point, when you get into this question of behaviors, you get into training and coaching and tools and certainly hiring as well. But it's something that people can replicate and emulate, and therefore it becomes really powerful. And that then now takes us back to this question of the relationship builder and the fact that relationship builders are so less likely to be star performers. It's not because, well, I'm a relationship builder, but rather it is the behaviors that those relationship builders are largely focused on that leads them to land in this profile. So we're not saying, emphatically not saying, that relationships are unimportant or even bad in sales. In fact, we're saying just the opposite. I think we'd all agree that relationships are hugely important in sales. And if your customers, if they outright dislike you, if they don't even know who you are, fix all that first, truly. But if the behavior that largely defines your strategy for building relationships is largely based on building familiarity and identifying and meeting your customers' known needs. Whatever you need, I am here for you. You say the word, I will get it done. Oh, don't need anything today? All right, I'll call back in a quarter. We'll talk again, and I'll see if you need anything then. It turns out that growing your business based purely out of familiarity is a horrible strategy for growing your business, because what do you do in a world where the two things your customers need more than anything else are more time to decide and a bigger discount? And if you're in the business of providing your customers what you need, well, what they need is to spend less money. At least that's what they believe they need. It can be a really tough recipe for growing your business. And so what challengers are doing is actually delivering to customers what we know from our research customers truly want, which is not just a friendly relationship. What they want is to be more competitive. What they want is to understand how they can save money or make money in ways they themselves have yet, despite all their research, figured out on their own. So if you can challenge me with new insights, and do that, by the way, professionally and diplomatically, don't be a jerk about it, right? But if you can be in a friendly, professional, empathetic way, show me new ways to think about my business that I myself have not thought of on my own, that's a conversation I want to have. And so, and again, we know that not just from experience, but from data, that customers, that's what they're looking for from a supplier, is insight, new ideas to help them be more competitive. So the idea is, what you find in the research and in experience is that over time, what's really interesting is that challenger reps wind up building better relationships with customers than relationship builders, because they're basing that relationship on something more than simply familiarity. They're basing that relationship on challenging that customer's thinking, which is exactly what customers tell us they're looking for in a supplier.
Yeah, that's right. And just one more thought there, Craig, is that, I'm asked this a lot, and I really think, and Brent and I have talked about this at great length with many of our clients, is that the currency of customer loyalty and the currency, frankly, to Brent's point, of what is a good salesperson to customer relationship has actually changed in a world where customers have ample amounts of information and ample amounts of advice with which to make decisions. So the world of the talking brochure, the world of what keeps you up at night and your 20 questions, that world is past now that customers can, using the information we as suppliers put on the web, using third-party consultants, using their own procurement departments, can disintermediate the salesperson from the actual purchase decision. So we know from our own data that by the time the average customer reaches out to a salesperson, their purchase decision is actually 60% over. So what do you do in that world? What is the currency of the relationship in that world? What's the currency of loyalty? And it turns out it's actually stuff that the customer couldn't have found on their own. It's unique insights, and that's what the customer is really looking for. And so we really think this is something that you probably wouldn't have found, and I argue almost certainly wouldn't have found back in days of information asymmetry, where that's really what we relied on as a salesperson. But in a world of information parity, that's why challengers win.
I was about to say, initially when I first asked the question, as you guys started to answer, I regretted it. I'm like, God, these guys are so sick of these dumb guys who just can't get over the fact. And then I thank you so much for taking that and running with it. Before we run out of time, I wonder if there's you can help a sales leader think of an example of someone who's embraced this change and the things that they did to make their organization, sort of adhere to the challenger sales model and really see success with it. I'd be really curious about that myself.
Brett, you want me to tell the RFP story? I love that story, and then you can maybe you're thinking about more from a company perspective. And I think there's different ways, Craig, to answer the question. I think one is, what does this look like for a rep who's embraced these kinds of behaviors? And one of the things I think we also go to great lengths to emphasize, and we get criticized by all kinds of talking heads out there who will say, yeah, there's nothing new here. And, by definition, that's true, because if it hadn't already been being practiced by top performing salespeople, we wouldn't have found it in the data.
Yeah.
So we're simply documenting what top salespeople are doing right now. Now, it's untrue to claim that that's actually the same thing that's being taught in the sales classroom right now, because I think most people would agree it's not. But it is fair to say that's what top salespeople are doing. And all we did was document that. That is 100% true. When we talk to these top salespeople and we try to understand, what makes them tick and how they go about challenging, what's that look like in nature, not the data and what the research says, but what's it look like in practice, we find all kinds of fascinating things and really get a sense of what it means to teach the customer, to tailor the message, to take control of the sales process and the sales conversation. So I'll tell you the story at a sort of sales rep level, and then Brent, I don't know if you want to provide more of an organizational or leadership perspective, because it is a big change, and I think that's a big part of the story. Quick story, and we love this one. It was actually in an article we wrote in Harvard Business Review this summer, which we think it really epitomizes what it means to challenge the customer's thinking. In a world, and as I said before, in a world where the customer can push us farther and farther out in the purchase decision, and we know by the time the average customer reaches out to a supplier, their purchase decision is nearly 60% complete. In some companies, that plays out in time after time, and we're seeing a lot of our business go down the trap of this sort of RFP trap. One company, a specialty chemicals company that we were working with, we were actually interviewing one of their challenger reps who we'd identified in our survey. Went out, we're talking to them, what does it mean to take control of the sale? And we're kicking around different ideas, and this guy was sharing different stories with us. And the one that really hit home with us, because what he said is, what you guys have to understand is our business has gone down the road of RFP to the extent that, 80, 90% of our business is being driven through RFP right now. And every single time I show up, it's us and our two biggest competitors. We're in this one of three situation. And we show up, and the customer knows everything about our solutions. They know everything about what we make and what we do. They know what makes us different, and all they want is for the supplier who's going to bend on price or terms and conditions the most at that point. That's really what they're looking for. And what the salesperson said is, I got a call from a customer I'd been chasing for a number of years and never really done any business together, never was the right time to switch suppliers. All of a sudden, I get this phone call on a Monday, and they say, shocked me and said, we've actually made a decision as a company to reevaluate our supplier for this certain specialty chemical that's critical to their manufacturing process. It's you guys and your two biggest competitors. I want you to come in on Friday. You've got an hour with our buying committee. Everybody's going to be there. Everyone from the CEO to the head of procurement, all the critical general managers, all the people who are the technical experts who use this product day in and day out in the manufacturing process. Everyone who needs to weigh in this decision is going to be in that room. Here is the RFP. Come on in. Give us the best shot. I think it's going to be great. I think you guys will be a great match for this business. And what the rep actually knew at this point, using this challenger mindset, where most reps would say, hey, this is great. It's like deal T-ball. It's like deals raining from the sky. I'm going to forecast this thing on Friday. And we know what happens. We know what's going to happen, right? They're going to forecast it this Friday and next Friday and the Friday after that, and it's going to go on forever. What this rep knew with this challenger mindset was, I'm being called in this late in the sales process probably because this customer's already made a decision and they're not going to buy from us. But we're being called in as a benchmarking exercise to provide leverage against the people they really want to buy from. And so in order to win this deal, I've got to completely reframe the way they're thinking about answering or addressing this business objective they're trying to get after. So what the rep did was really powerful. He said he walks into the RFP session, walks in Friday morning, 9 a.m., got his response to the RFP, and actually tells the committee, I've got my response to RFP, but I'm going to let you guys read that on your own time. I've only got an hour with you. And what I'd rather spend my hour with you doing is not going through this RFP because, frankly, it's exactly what you asked for. It's no different from what the other two guys are going to walk in and present. It's everything you asked for. You can read it on your own time. Not a lot of difference there. It's kind of commoditized. What I'd rather spend my hour talking to you about is the three things that should have been in your RFP but weren't, and why they're so critical to your business, why they're so critical to getting after the objective that you're trying to get after and addressing the business opportunity and challenge you're trying to resolve. And so what this rep proceeds to do is over the next hour completely reframe the objective this company was even trying to get after in the first place, such that at the end of this sell day or this pitch day, the CEO sent all three salespeople packing, said we're going to blow up this RFP process, start from the beginning, ended up redrawing it, redrew the RFP around the criteria that one challenger sales rep had taught them to value and taught them more important in a way that company ended up winning the business when, initially they were called in merely for providing leverage against the chosen supplier. It was a benchmarking exercise, reframe the way that they were thinking about this business challenge. That's what it means to challenge. That's what it means to take control. That's what it means to deliver provocative insight in a way that gets you out of this death spiral of the customer contacting you later and later in the sales process because they've got all the information they need to make their decision. So that's an individual sales rep story. Brent, any perspective from the organizational side?
A little. With a view towards time, I would simply say this. We love that story, first of all. It's a great story. When you tell that story to sales leaders, it's really fun because their eyes get all big. It's like, yeah, score one for sales. I mean, it's like that classic moment we all live for. But I think the thing we'd all agree with is while that is a dramatic story and a fantastic story because there's a great win at the end of the story, it is not necessarily a story that you'd want to base your entire sales strategy on, right? Which is, because you can imagine that story could have easily gone the other way. The customer could have looked at that sales rep when he said, here's the response to our RFP. Tell you what, for the next hour, since you have a limited amount of time, I'd rather talk about something else. And you can imagine the client saying, no, we're going to talk about this. And if you're not going to talk about it, get out, right? So it is a dramatic story, and it works. And what you do for that next hour is crucially important. If you can methodically dismantle that customer's thinking and show them in a very systematic way that essentially they're wrong, that they got it wrong, that they missed something. And again, do that diplomatically, do it professionally, do it empathetically, but do it. But that said, the more interesting thing from a systemic perspective is how do I avoid getting into that situation in the first place? So then I don't have to go in and completely blow up the customer thinking. And this is no different from what Bob Miller was writing about 20, 30 years ago in strategic selling, which is how do I get ahead of the RFP? How do I crack open that early part of the purchase? And the answer there is imagine a world in which you are not just challenging at that late stage, but challenging very early on in the customer's learning process. You are there with content that challenges their thinking, shows them it's not these things you should be concerned about, but those things you should be concerned about. And the reason why this is interesting, and particularly interesting in the context of a sales methodology, is that, again, as Matt mentioned, we know from our data that in most cases, sales no longer have access to the customer at those very early stages. Customers are shutting us out. But you still have to be there with that kind of insight, which leaves arguably only one channel through which to do it, which is arguably your marketing channel. And unless you are building a commercial organization that challenges and not just a sales team that challenges, you could wind up still having to base your entire strategy on the very story that Matt mentioned, which we think is a pretty dangerous place to be. So much of our work, and this actually is not in the book. We hint at it in the book, but our thinking has, I wouldn't say evolved, but we've expanded on it pretty significantly to look very deeply on the marketing side and the content marketing side and all the stuff that we do in the name of thought leadership. People tell us all the time on the marketing side, we do this insight thing. We've got it nailed. We're thought leaders in our industry. And then we look at what they call insight, and indeed it is thought leadership. The difference is we would say thought leadership and insight are two radically different things. That insight has at its heart this very interesting moment where it's not just teaching you an idea of what you could be doing, but unteaching you an idea that you're already doing. And yes, I just made up a word. We call it unteaching. But the challenge your customers' thinking on what they're doing. And you can do that not just through your sales force, but through your white papers, your blogs, your posts, your tweets, and your infographics. And so What we're particularly interested in today is not so much building the challenger sales force, which is still as crucial today as it was 3 years ago when we first saw it in the data, but we're so much more interested in building a challenger commercial organization that challenges customers through every access point that we have to them in a consistent way. So we're not just pouring out content into the world that's about anything, but we're leaving breadcrumbs out in the marketplace of ideas that lead customers along this path of disruptive ideas that ultimately leads them to a place where they're willing and interested in actually asking for a conversation with our sales team around that very disruptive insight. And so that's a lot of where our thinking is now, because we strongly believe that your star performers can probably do exactly what Matt's talking about, and the rest of your sales force, with respect, can't, because it's hard. It's really, really hard, and it's risky. And the only way that you win in this world where your customer can learn on their own is if the entire organization is aligned around not just thought leadership, not just content, but insight, and insight specifically designed to challenge customers' thinking. So that gives you a sense, Craig, of where our thinking has evolved since the book came out. Hopefully it's a little bit helpful. And then more, watch this space, because there's a lot more on this to come in the future.
Excellent. Well, guys, I appreciate you squeezing in the time with me, and we did it. I mean, in that short amount of time, I learned a lot, but I do wish I had 4 hours with you. So, on behalf of Lattice Engines and behalf of the Modern Sales Leader study and research and content, although suffice to say, I'm not sure I want to say that around you guys, considering all the work you've done. I appreciate you guys coming out and talking to us. I think this is going to be great for our audience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, guys.